Hello, YouTube friends. How are you? Here's me. It is Thursday. Okay, so I don't know how I feel about this. So, lots of things happened yesterday during my life. One of them was that my husband was making dinner, and that was great. So, I had a limited amount of time to really just, keep this short and punchy. And then the smoke alarm went off for like a really long time. And then, um, then my dog got sick. It seems like a terrible story. Like the next is like I didn't get my homework done or something. And what happened is I didn't sleep last night because he's over there and he's still really cute. So, yeah, whatever. Anyways, one of the things I wanted to talk about today is the structure of a scenario. When you structure a scenario, you have to follow a specific pattern. It is similar to a multiple choice question, but it is not the same. It is not the same. And also, I see people make this mistake quite a bit. And recently, somebody sent me their scenario and they were like, hey, what do you think? And I'm like, this isn't really a scenario. This is a really compelling multiple choice question, but it is not a scenario because the challenge is that when I make a decision in a scenario, I'm not supposed to get feedback right away. Like, yeah, you did that right. I'm like, where did that come from? No. When I make a decision, I should see what happens as a result. So let me show you my little framework. I'm terrible at this because it's all backwards, guys. It really messes with my head, okay? I'm like Da Vinci here writing backwards. By the way, if you ever are in a city that has the Da Vinci exhibition, it's worth every penny. Not only do most places recreate his machines, and so they build them out so you can see what kind of contraptions he would actually have come up with, but also, if you're lucky, you get to see some of his notes, which he wrote backwards perfectly, like just with ink, so beautifully. And the only way you could actually read them is by putting a mirror up to them. So he taught himself to like write in a mirror shape form. I don't know how he did that. I don't know why he did it, but it looks beautiful and you can check it out and, be in the same room with the ink that Da Vinci bought and used. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the scenario piece. So when we begin a scenario, and this is what I mean, this is a single scenario interaction. Here, these little goofy faces are supposed to, when they say in theater they have those two masks, the sad mask and the happy mask. That's what this is supposed to represent. It's supposed to represent story and setup. So you're supposed to set this up somehow, and it's supposed to not only give context to the rest of the story, but also it is supposed to help me care about the outcome. Because if I don't care about the choices that I'm making, then what's the point of that scenario, right? So you're supposed to make it somehow mean something to me. Maybe introducing somebody who is working through a problem, who are struggling with something, or is trying to get someplace, or already believes they're someplace, but are faced with some interesting or difficult decisions. Hence this part. This is where we get the decision-making area. So set up the character, set up the story. Now they have to make a decision. Then they have to, they're faced with a decision. Then they get options on how to solve that decision. I've got 3 here. This is the right answer, let's say, and there's 2 wrong answers. If you were talking about a multiple choice question, we would call this the stem, the question. We would call this the correct answer and the distractors. The distractors are supposed to distract you from the right answer. But really what that means is that they're supposed to be so compelling. If you have no idea, if you're a novice or you don't know what to do in the situation, all of these choices look equally valid. They all look absolutely relevant. So that's why you really also can't waste these options, because each of them should be a lesson. Because if a novice always makes this mistake, you really want to make sure that it's in there so that they can see what the consequences of their mistakes are. Now, I'm put 3 options here. It's not necessary to always have 3 options. In fact, some of the best and punchiest scenarios that I've seen use 2 options. A great example of this is if you look up Okay, lifesaver. It's a module that has to do with building your confidence in helping strangers when they're like fallen down or something. Give them CPR or give them first aid or execute the Heimlich maneuver. So in those situations, because it's so time constrained and very time critical, life critical, there's only two valid options. You either take action or you don't. And so all that, depending on the goal of your scenario, you might only have two options for people. And there what's happening is you're reinforcing people taking action. So it's not, you don't want them to like consider something for a super long time because that time is not available when somebody's choking. You just have to learn to be okay making decisions more promptly and taking action more promptly. So here, you might add a timing sequence to it if you want to, like saying, oh, you only have, 10, 15 seconds to choose the right option, but it has to be relevant. Sometimes you want people to think about and consider things. So a timer is not necessary. And if you can come up with 3, I wouldn't do it more than 3, really. That's quite a bit. If you can come up with 3 valid options for people to choose from, that all sound very credible and all lead to really interesting and meaningful consequences, then go for it. So use this. A structure that I suggest you check out here is Broken Coworker. So go to brokencoworker.com to participate. And you'll see we came up with 3 options for each one. And then see here, I've got this one marked as correct and 2 incorrect answers. You don't always have to follow this formula either. Sometimes there's the best answer, the okay answer, and the wrong answer. And this is actually really well shown in Broken Coworker, because what happens is the goal of Broken Coworker is to teach you that it's okay to be more assertive and make more assertive decisions. However, in some cases, we have really assertive answers and some answers that are not necessarily assertive, but they're also not like the totally passive. So we added values to each one. So at the end, you actually have a score. That score determines if you go to the very end or if we kick you out early. So you can actually add value to each of these to say, this one is worth 1 point if you get it. This one's half a point, and this one's worth 0, right? Now, here's where people mess up. This is the biggest one, because up until this point, most people are familiar with that. We were taught, we were taught this way in school, right? You had tons of multiple choice question tests, and this is very natural for us. The problem is, what I see is that people get to this point, and the minute I choose this, somebody gives me, instead of telling me what's happening, what is the result of my decision, they'll say, great work. You did that right. That breaks the narrative. I'm making the decision on behalf of John. You set up the story of John here. John's got a decision. John makes one of these choices, picks this one. You don't tell me if this was the right answer right away. In fact, what you should do is become what I perceive as something like an observer, an outside observer. You're watching the story from this. You're not being the helpful guide. You're being the observer, and you're, in fact, just documenting what happened. So if I chose this one, and let's say this is me and I chose to take out the car when it was when there was a big storm, because I thought the car would help me survive the storm instead of staying indoors when there was like a big tornado coming. So that's what I chose. You're not going to tell me, don't say, oh no, you died. Or it wouldn't necessarily be, you could do that, but it's too blatant. It's almost like, oh, that's not very, it's not dramatic enough. So, or that wasn't the right answer because you died. You don't say that wasn't the right answer. Avoid all feedback of that kind. What I want you to do is describe what happened. So instead of making judgment on that action, I want you to describe the outcome. So John is faced with a decision. The first decision is, should he take the car? Should he stay home? Or should he go to the neighbor's house? If he chooses to take the car, what my But the next thing that I'm going to see as a learner when I tell John to take the car, I'm going to see is John drives off. After about 5 minutes, the tornado hits and he is crushed by another car hitting him through the tornado. And that's it. You're just showing what happens next. Now, if this is the coolest thing, if your consequences are strong enough and powerful enough and described in this detail enough, like you want to add that detail, like especially, you remember I talked about before, you may not have seen it, but go to my other videos. I talk about the story. The story needs to be detailed. And your consequences, they need to be gross and detailed. Like if somebody's dying, show that, but don't include any judgment. Like, was that wrong or right? Because what you want the person to do, if it's done well, is to draw their own conclusions. Like you want them to read that and be like, wow, I just killed this person because I wasn't paying attention to the safety protocols. You want them to make that call. And then you can get to the feedback. But if you've done the consequences right, the feedback is just a reinforcement of what they already learned, of what they already believe, because they're like, oh, that wasn't the right thing to do. Ugh. Right? And then you get the feedback and you're like, that wasn't the right thing to do. And you're like, I know, what should I do to make it better? So sometimes what happens is when I design scenarios, people are very, after these distractors and options are very easy for people to come up with, although they're not the easiest thing to come up with. Everybody knows what the right answer is, but to come up with meaningful alternatives where people make, have bad decision-making, those are sometimes hard for experts. So that's why you talk to the top performer, because they've been there, they've made the bad decisions and they know why, or you can help them uncover why. And then what happens is people are kind of afraid of these consequences. They're like, oh no, we can't say they died, or we can't say that they got fired. And what I say there is, if you're hesitant to show a really powerful consequence, or your sponsor or the person you're working with is, it's usually because they have this reservation, and you can talk to them about it, of course. The reservation is that they're saying, if you do this, this will happen every time. And that's not the point. The point is that's why we have a specific character in our scenario, because this is the story of a single person with these three options. And this is what happened to them. We're not saying this is a prescription of, if you do this, you will have this outcome every time. This is one of the possible outcomes, and some are better than others. So consequences are essential. If you don't have consequences and you have straight up feedback, you are robbing your learner of making that click on their own. And that's why I was just listening to it was a YouTube Q&A by a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Anyways, he was talking about how when you're counseling somebody, and let's say they tell you their problem and you're like, oh, gee, I know how to solve that one. I know how to solve it. You have to hold back. You have to stop yourself from giving advice. The job of that person, the counselor, is not for them to tell you what to do, because you know how you get advice from friends and family who have been there, but you don't actually ever really act on it or take advantage of that advice. It's because the shift in your mind has not happened for you to be ready for that advice. So most times what happens is somebody will give us advice, then we'll go mess up things on our own. And then we'll go, oh yeah, I remember when Aunt Judy told me to do that. Yeah, I should have listened to her. Well, you wouldn't have, because you need to come up with that on your own. So you don't want to rob your learner of the mind shift perspective. It makes for a better lesson if they make draw the conclusion on their own, because your consequences are so powerful. Then you saying, yeah, you got that right. Or no, you didn't do that well. Nobody's there. Nobody's chattering in the world saying, oh, was that the right choice? You just observe what's happening around you. So all you're doing here is you're sharing what happened with no judgment, whether that was right or wrong. You want them to make that distinction. And if they can't, that's what the feedback is there as a backup. Because if somebody doesn't know that this is a bad outcome, then the feedback is the kind of like the quality check that makes sure that they did get it. And a lot of people get worried about that. They're like, what if I have consequences and people don't get it? So one of the ways you can do that is, now if you want to go to see how to delay consequences, because what you can do is have about, let's say 5 or 6 of these in a row and just show consequences. And at the end of the 5, give kind of like big feedback. And that's what we did. If you want to check out a way of showing that delayed one kind of strategy, go to brokencoworker.com. And if you work through it, and if you're successful and you make it to the very end, we revisit each scene, what you did, and then kind of give you some guidance. And so, but the beauty of saying, sometimes people get scared that are like, well, what if somebody's new? I'm taking them through this scenario. They get this consequence. What if they don't get that that's wrong? Here's how you do that. You give them another scenario and another scenario and another scenario, and keep on showing them the outcomes, which are tweaked, but also, like I said, that's why you got to amp these up, because sometimes they need to be amped up to have impact, and detailed. So, and you can always either, like in the case of Broken Coworker, which is about 7 scenarios in a row, we decided to give that feedback at the very end to not break the narrative, because it was a story, right? And to get feedback in the middle of a story is kind of weird. So you go through the story and experience kind of that whole path. But then what you can do is, if it's more important that they get feedback, let's say at the very beginning, that will influence maybe some more challenging decisions later on, you can have that feedback right after your consequence. But do not mix the feedback with the consequence, and don't put the feedback and consequence on the same page. Let's let that sink in and then take them to the feedback. Don't rob them of this opportunity. So, yeah, it works. It's a good system. It just takes a little bit of time to get that information from an expert. But once you've got that rhythm going, and if you just follow this and say, okay, what's our story? What's the big decision that somebody needs to make? What's that profound piece that people get stuck on? What are some things that they think they should do in this situation? What are some good ways to approach it? What are some not so good ways to approach it? And what happens as a result of each one? That's awesome. So that's it for my scenario overview for you. Hope you found that useful. Thursday, woo! We're almost done the week. So you have like a little bit of time left to kick butt today and tomorrow. I will be here again tomorrow, so leave me a chat if you want to, if you have any questions about the scenario design process, if you came up with some other ones as a result of watching my other lives. Yeah, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and thanks for being here. Take care. Bye.